In the future, we may have technologies sufficiently advanced that they are indistinguishable from magic, but could those civilizations also be indistinguishable from primitive ones? Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, Steam Age, Space Age. We sure do like our ages. And we often define our history around a given piece of technology that seems critical to that era. But what about technologies that don't fit into an era and yet remain in use? Or which would imply a more primitive era and yet exist in a more technologically advanced one, as we often see in science fiction, but sometimes even in our real history. These are what we call anachronistic technologies, ones that seem out of place for the time, but we also wrap them into developments that might have occurred had some other technology not been invented. We see this in cases like steampunk, where the steam engine technology that ran trains and factories in the 19th century saw far wider and more creative uses. We wonder what might have happened if a civilization had run only on steam engines for a few centuries, or if some great empire like Rome had discovered that technology at its height, or another like firearms. Often in fantasy we have wars that never discovered firearms or steam so as to remain locked in the medieval era indefinitely. Indeed, fantasy works often have quite the mishmash of anachronistic technologies, including many that are post-medieval. We also see it a lot in science fiction, folks in an era of advanced technology riding around on horses while they've got anti-gravity levitation and cheap interstellar space travel, or using swords and other melee weapons, or sidearms that look flashy but are no better than what a duelist in the Wild West or a soldier in the trenches of the First World War might have. Star Wars does this a lot, indeed it's probably one of its more iconic aspects, with droids and speeders and blasters in the same environments people are riding animals like tauntauns or giant lizards around, using lightsabers and channeling magic energies of the Force. So one of the things that we'll be discussing today is how realistic that is, or perhaps is not, along with what aspects of our own society might be considered anachronistic. While we might poke a bit of fun at a few settings and franchises for unrealistic uses of anachronistic technologies, I should emphasize that they are trying to tell a story, and it's often intentionally a high-concept one, like King Arthur in space, or the Wild West in space, or sword and sorcery in space. So they were not aiming for realism, and we're not going to throw stones at them for that, as many are wonderful stories. Plus, we don't need to throw stones. We have more advanced weapons. And that's a good thing to keep in mind, because a lot of combat in science fiction isn't just unrealistic for having sword fights and dogfights, but maybe even for having humans at all. Indeed, regular plain old vanilla humans may be the most anachronistic thing appearing in a lot of science fiction. And a lot of science fiction is written with the intent of allowing us, as modern readers, to enjoy it, and also to draw on classic themes that don't happen anymore, but are very foundational to our culture, even if in cases like Wild West gun duels or protracted fencing fights with swords between knights or samurai, they did not really happen that much in our actual history. We probably also need to acknowledge early on that anachronistic technology is maybe not the best term, as it is implying certain technologies could only have been invented or useful in certain times or orders of discovery. Anachronism is the state or condition of being chronologically out of place. In practice, what we really mean is ahistoric or anahistoric, as a piece of technology is associated with a period of history, usually a given time and culture. We only have one known timeline with one history, so anachronistic is fine enough, but in discussion of fantasy stories or altered timelines, or technologies developing on some alien planet made by alien critters, the term anachronistic gets a bit iffy. As an example, the Einstein-Szilard refrigerator was designed by those two men just over a century ago and has no moving parts. Nothing in it is high-tech, whatever that really means, and it simply requires water, ammonia as a refrigerant, and a pressure equalizer like butane or methanol inside a fairly intricate set of pipework and containers. You apply heat to one of those, such as by sticking it in a fire, and it cools your box for keeping food, or even cooling a room. It's low-tech enough you couldn't make it in any Bronze or Copper Age society, and now you have useful refrigeration a few thousand years before the present. I would be a bit dubious if it could be invented by anyone without a solid knowledge of thermodynamics, but then someone could say the same of the steam engine, which is basically the technology the three laws of thermodynamics were developed around in the 19th and early 20th century. And yet we have had steam engines long before that, indeed all the way back to the 1st century AD, midway through the classical era, albeit it is a fairly crude toy there. Could someone back in the Bronze Age invent one? Probably not. Could one follow a diagram to make one? Yes, easily. More so than the steam engine, I should think, since there's a lot more moving parts and pieces that can explode under high pressure. Steampunk is probably one of our best known genres that focuses on seemingly anachronistic technology, and is more interesting than what I'll just label fridge punk, but it raises a bit of a key point for consideration. If a given technology is introduced into a much lower tech society that people can build and have good motivation to build, isn't it very likely they will quickly understand its function and grasp the sciences around it? And we do have tons of real-world examples of this, even ignoring that the culture that invented a given device is really just example zero, since that culture did not invent it, some inventor did, albeit usually on the backs of earlier devices and thinkers. But during the colonial era, we had a lot of technologies introduced into civilizations that lacked them, like firearms, but even including the wheel, or other technologies that required things they didn't have. The colonial powers were generally more technologically advanced, and yet in their turn learned certain mining and agricultural techniques. We see a two-way street even in cases like the exchange of horses and agriculturally useful corn and potatoes between the Eastern and Western Hemisphere. In many cases, we don't really have a good picture of what their early introduction and adoption of those technologies, devices, or organisms looked like, but we have tons of examples of comfortable mastery of the new thing within a generation or two. We should assume any technology that we could explain to a 10-year-old is probably something anyone through any period of history could have gotten, and a certain amount of synchronicity could have led to the quicker development of. For instance, we had a basic understanding of solar power before we had power plants and electricity to any homes. Becquerel noted the effect of sunlight producing electric charge in some materials back in 1839, and the first commercial solar panel was created by Charles Fritz in 1881, 1 year after Edison patented the light bulb. It was half a century before Russell Earl created the solar cell design, right before the outbreak of World War II, and almost 2 more decades before Bell Labs created commercially viable silicon solar cells. By then, coal, oil, and nuclear had quite a head start in both development and deployment. It would be very easy to imagine Becquerel deciding to spend more time on that, or it getting developed more in countries without a lot of easy access to coal, or having a more adverse response to the smog of that era. Solar punk is one of the other punk genres, besides the two better-known cyberpunk and steampunk genres of fiction, but it could have become reality. So too, on some planet that didn't have much coal or oil, species developing there might have had to stick to steam powered by firewood or wood gas, or develop solar sooner or nuclear. So it's not just about one technology developed earlier, it can be about another just getting invented a little later or being a little less trusted. Remember Napoleon's alleged comments on steam engines for ships. You would make a ship sail against the winds and currents by lighting a bonfire under her deck. I have no time for such nonsense. We can laugh about that now, but if you didn't know about steam engines, you'd probably nod at the remark. It does sound kinda crazy. Like blasting people into space by having them ride on 1,000,000 pounds of burning fuel. And it kind of is, too. Rockets blow up a lot, and early steam engines often spectacularly and pyrotechnically failed, blowing boiling water, steam, and burning material all over. Not good inside a crowded and wooden vessel. Building a ship out of metal, which sinks in water rather than wood, would also have been fairly unthinkable. So is building a road out of metal for trains to run on in an era where metal was vastly more expensive before we got cheap steel. And yet the Bessemer process, or some of the other ones for mass-producing cheap steel, could have been made at earlier dates of history. Once made though, a given technology would tend to be the focus of efforts, and rival technologies often set aside in favor of what seems the better current competitor. As technology progresses, it is quite common for tried and true technologies and objects to be incrementally improved, such as by refinement of shape and composition. A knife produced in medieval Europe serves much the same purpose as a modern knife, but the latter has benefited from superior metallurgy, as does the medieval one over bronze or flint knives. Other technologies may be rendered obsolete entirely, or at least fall from popularity. The horse and buggy experienced this when the automobile became mass-produced, now being mostly relegated to leisure activities, but in my area it is entirely common to see a horse and buggy on the road as we have a large Amish population. So too, scooters on the local bike trail, because wheels are fine but the gear and chain for a bicycle is not permitted. Swords still fascinate us. There are many channels, several much larger than this one, devoted to sword making or testing out fancy sword designs in real life or with modern materials. Scalagrim and many others come to mind. Swords are now part of ceremonial military ritual rather than actual combat in favor of firearms, and indeed most war is really done with tanks, howitzers, planes, and helicopters. Nonetheless, they remain incredibly popular items. Even in my area, where hunting deer is practically the official pastime, you are as likely to find a sword or knife collection in a house as a gun collection. There's also still tons of horses around, and not just in Amish households, though worldwide that's probably less true, especially on a per capita basis. However, reduced popularity does not mean no one uses these and other old technologies, or improves on them. You'll get a better saddle nowadays than people would have had a century ago. Nor does obsolescence mean everyone wants to use newer technologies. There are any number of motivations that could lead people and even whole cultures to embrace older technologies in favor of newer ones. Mechanical watches over digital ones was common, and remains so even in an era of smart watches. But even these folks may opt to improve things beyond when these technologies were in popular use. I'd emphasize that because we often have certain technologies that either resonate with us or very much do not. I often say that as the technology train runs on and allows ever easier personal survival, it makes it easier and easier for folks to decide they want to get off at a given stop. This technology they use, but not others. I've also commented before on how in my own anecdotal experience, it often seems like a lot of us who are very futurist aligned not only still have our fair share of lower tech devices lying around our homes, but often more than the normal. I still have a collection of handmade paper notebooks I use for notes for this show, for instance, and they are definitely anachronistic tech, as they are typically made using a modern tech to enhance an older process. Even something as simple as faux leather, or paper that has that old-timey look but takes and holds ink better. A lot of science fiction writers were also very slow converts from pen and paper to typewriter, and later to word processor. We also still tend to use a lot of paper books when digital is arguably better in almost every respect, and people still trade in old vinyl records or Nintendo cartridges, or laser discs and CDs, and if anything, vintage and retro technology and themes are a constant source of collector trade and resurrection with minor changes for new fashion or style. This isn't the only reason for folks to keep paper books around, though. And anachronistic tech can revolve around a distrust of reliance on any given technology, too. While even the most ardent bibliophile will be hard-pressed to deny the advantages associated with being able to carry entire libraries worth of books in one's pocket, not everyone will choose to rely on phones, tablets, apps, and other computers for such things. For some, this may come from concerns of pragmatism and security. A book cannot be force-updated via the internet for censorship reasons, or wiped clean by a solar storm, geomagnetic event, the EMP of nuclear detonations, or malware. A book also cannot run out of battery power, or be rendered unreadable by changing file formats or lost encryption keys. For others, like myself, the main concern may be principally one of aesthetics and personal taste. My office where I write has a big old wooden desk surrounded by big old wooden bookshelves full of science texts and sci-fi novels, and a lot of vintage space art that all helps set my mood as I write our episodes. I and many others also just like books as objects, the appearance of a full bookshelf, the smell of the paper and binding, the tactile sensation of the pages. Though I should note that real books have their own problems. Besides being far more expensive to make and larger in size than digital ones, paper ages, grows brittle, can tear, stain, and burn, while ink can fade. Advanced materials could split the difference by replacing the paper and bindings with ones able to withstand centuries or even millennia of use without any degradation, perhaps with pages made of flexible diamond or corundum weave, and the words and illustrations part of the molecular structure of the page. We have the example of people using swords to fight with in Frank Herbert's Dune, but another tech they have in that fictional universe is a crystal sheet 1 molecule thick and super hard they keep records on for millennia. And we have a lot of folks who like to improve on some abandoned or obsolete technology as a hobby or profession. Someone makes those handmade paper notebooks after all, or forges those swords, or trains those horses. Indeed, we have large organizations like the SCA, the Society for Creative Anachronism, that are less about historical reenactment and living history than, in their own words, choosing to selectively recreate the culture, choosing the elements of the culture that interest and attract us. And in the SCA's case, that's the Middle Ages, and it's a theme common in a lot of role-playing games too. Period dress is common these days along with cosplay, but for folks involved in it, it sure is nice to have modern sewing machines, or Amazon to get those costumes, or modern fabrics and materials so you can look like you're from antiquity but not have to be uncomfortable while you're at it. Climate-controlled buildings do not require thick and heavy coats or dresses, but we might like to wear the fashion without sweating to death. Indeed, you might get climate-controlled clothes, and future clothes might get to eras seemingly more over-the-top than the height of Victorian or Art Deco fashion, yet be more comfortable and flexible than pajamas and easily donned. We are not necessarily always talking purely artistic fashionistas in the future either. Folks living off-Earth might need to wear a lot of protective clothes that are quite heavy, and that might result in as elaborate of styles to surcoats as anything we saw in medieval knights or Victorian lords and ladies. Decorative spacesuits are not a thing yet, but they will be, and we are likely to see anachronistic recreations related to that. One thing I like about Warhammer 40,000, a setting full of mixed and anachronistic tech, is that the folks running around in advanced armor with advanced weapons are not uniformly simple in their regalia, like we often see in sci-fi shows with limited costume budgets, but get very intricate and detailed with their panoply. Perhaps the most straightforward motivation for a lot of anachronistic tech is simple fascination with old technology and making a hobby of recreating and collecting them. They aren't really mass manufacturing. Much like in the past, every piece is hard to make and thus a lot of individual decoration is incorporated into it, and that decoration is understandably most prized by collectors. Perhaps the most straightforward motivation for a lot of anachronistic tech is simple fascination with old technology and making a hobby of recreating and collecting them. The popularity of historical and fantasy fiction, especially of the adventurous and military variety, creates many historical and ancient weapon enthusiasts, for example. Though war gear and old clothing isn't all we collect, and indeed sewing machines for making clothing are quite the collector's item. Such people may be content to collect old swords and firearms, while others may seek to improve on them. A sword made from modern spring steel or carbon fiber can benefit from superior modern metallurgy. In the future, this may go even further, as yet unrealized materials technology could create swords even sharper, more durable, more corrosion resistant, and far lighter than any sword ever wielded in combat historically. The same holds true for obsolete forms of armor. We can't rule out some new technology making them useful again, like in Dune where personal force fields make firearms redundant and everybody fights up close with knives. Indeed, we could imagine superior materials making handheld firearms useless, like exoskeletons or powered armor or personal point defense. There is a limit as to how fast you can move a bullet by chemistry, and personal radar systems and a blade of lasers might be able to casually track and deflect bullets fired from range. One seemingly minor change in tech could disrupt the whole military landscape and see old techs re-emerge with new improvements. We see this even with computers, as we often see attempts to build them out of other materials than silicon semiconductors, including mechanical ones or those using improvements to the vacuum tube technology that computers used before semiconductor transistors. Computers and calculating machines are a lot older. The Antikythera mechanism, built thousands of years ago and discovered before the modern era of computers, is the oldest known example of an analog computer and thought to have been used for calendar keeping and astronomy, and the even older Stonehenge is often speculated to have served a similar purpose. Our ancestors did tend to be understandably rather interested in the skies, weather, and seasons. They also had an interest in calculating machines, even beyond simple tally sticks, from counting boards to more sophisticated types of abacus or astrolabes. How hard is it to think they might have developed a mechanical computer for Wilhelm Schickard or Blaise Pascal did in the early 17th century? Indeed, this is the 400th anniversary of Schickard's letters to Johannes Kepler discussing his creation of mechanical arithmetic instruments. Perhaps only the coiled springs and their use in clocks permitted a real explosion into gears. Indeed, Blaise Pascal is the first person known to have worn a wristwatch, strapping his pocket watch on that way, so it obviously influenced his work. But I see nothing to indicate these couldn't have been done earlier if the stars had aligned to make it more curious and fashionable. Over the years, we've done some episodes that relate to this topic, like post-apocalyptic techno-barbarians, post-science civilizations, and techno-primitivism, and I always half expect someone to argue in the comments that it's absurd to imagine folks abandoning useful technology or voluntarily choosing to use harder approaches. I don't recall anyone arguing that, and I think it rises beyond the hobbyist level too. I mentioned the Amish earlier and my own predilection for keeping lower tech items around. I spend so much time trying to stare into the future that it's nice to have some counterweights, so to speak. I do love history, of course. There's tons of books on it in my home, albeit most are my wife's, and my best friend is a history teacher. I often write or work with an audiobook on in the background, and it is as likely to be a fantasy or history book as a sci-fi novel. The week this episode airs, this show turns 10 years old, and I turn 44. And I've lived through a fair number of shifts in technology and studied previous ones a lot in order to try to see future ones better. There's nothing new about folks getting reluctant about new technology, but I don't think any period has seen such an attraction to retro and vintage technologies, fashions, and styles as ours, and I think AI is now driving this even harder. Later this week we'll be talking about Transcendence, and it's sort of the unofficial companion video to this one, as is last month's Next Technological Revolution, whose script I was recording before writing this episode. Transcendence will be talking about ideas and concepts for moving beyond the strictly human, whether it's becoming post-human or ascending some other plane of reality, and it's commonly shown to be the end of civilization in science fiction. The reason why, in a galaxy billions of years older than our planet, there aren't huge sprawling galactic empires everywhere. Sci-fi also often shows cultures that went back to more primitive technologies too, and usually to a very anachronistic period. We have a tendency to show idyllic rural village life as hard-working and back to nature, and not really mention how utterly brutal that life tended to be, but of course with anachronistic technology it does not have to be. And I should note, having grown up near Amish and Mennonite communities most of my life, they often do use technology, including batteries, lights, and solar panels, and rarely have an issue with using things produced by technology, like cheap high-quality steel, often own cell phones, and so on. There's also a lot of ex-Amish who cheerfully and adeptly use whatever technology they feel like, and what is allowed by the community is often very specific to the local community. We see a lot of techno-primitivism in sci-fi. In the Stargate franchise, for instance, we often see anachronistic mixes of primitive and advanced technology as the protagonists visit worlds where a primitive culture is enslaved by a handful of advanced aliens posing as gods, or have thrown them out and retained some of their more durable technology like energy weapons. We even get to meet some of the other ancient races, like the Nox, who are pure simple hunter-gatherers to visitors but have floating cities in the sky hidden by invisibility technology. It's also implied they are nominal ancient allies, the Asgard, doomed their species by excessive reliance on technology, even down to altering their physiology at a root level. When your technology is good enough though, especially if you are incorporating it into yourself, you likely don't need much of an apparent presence or technological infrastructure. Some genetically enhanced cyborg might look like you or I, while having an IQ of 1000, the strength and durability of a superhero, never be sick or tired or need sleep, never feel uncomfortable or age, and have untold terabytes of knowledge and entertainment in their mind, or invisible in the cloud to access without need of a TV or VR headset. So what need do they have for plush houses? I don't want to focus on techno-primitivism today. As mentioned, we did an episode on that already, but there's an example in a sci-fi novel in Peter Hampton's Commonwealth saga where they come across the homeworld of a race that transcended, and it's got their primitive cousins still living there at a lower tech level. They are not ignorant or particularly technophobic, they just didn't want to go the rest of the way down that road. They know where the Ascension machine is and what it does, and are no more shocked or confused by visitors arriving in spaceships than someone living in a rural log cabin or an Amish household would be by someone showing up in a truck with a cell phone. And I tend to think a lot of civilizations will see folks getting off the high-tech path or transhumanism train at a destination they personally find more comfortable, and that we will only see a rise in vintage and retro techs and themes and anachronistic developments of them. Indeed, you might be living in one of them. It is very easy to imagine folks in the future might decide to go live virtually, Matrix style or as an uploaded mind, and have picked this current era as the place to dwell. You or I might have had our memory of the real world removed or quarantined, or just be the kids of those who did, and this reality might be an ancestor simulation, as they are called, but anachronistic. Indeed, it's very hard to imagine any ancestor simulation not built specifically for historic or anthropological experimentation would ever not be anachronistic. See our episode Are We Living in an Ancestor Simulation for more discussion of that. So what are some other examples of current anachronistic tech or where it's likely to develop? Well, we talk about anachronistic farming villages going back to the soil, and we do see a lot of this in gardening, where folks use older techniques but with more updated tools. Someone goes out with a trowel and a hoe to labor under the sun with a smartphone in one pocket and one which these days might be connected to their electronic rain gauge and weather station in that garden, or controlling their irrigation system, or just playing their favorite YouTube channel while they work. By the way, don't forget to like this episode and subscribe to this channel. But another thing to note is that we are likely to see a lot of anachronistic tech for farming and life support on off-world bases, as we get out into space and everything is being grown in greenhouses or hydroponically on some otherwise dead and airless world under a dome or LED lighting. There might be a long time waiting on tractors and fields of wheat out there. See our Agri-Worlds and Farm Planets episode for more discussion of that. And while there is much promise in various future farming technologies such as hydroponics and vertical farming, these require infrastructure and won't appeal to everyone. Traditional farming has its own challenges, however, especially in less than optimal conditions. Genetically modified crops and livestock could in theory allow old-fashioned styles of agriculture to be higher yielding and self-sufficient. Crops engineered to fix nitrogen, for example, would eliminate the need to buy and use nitrogen fertilizers. Concerns over GMOs or secondary environmental impacts might not be considered as big a deal on an alien and an artificial planet, or of course we might simply have gotten better at their use and controlling unwanted side effects. Disease and pest-resistant crops and livestock would increase yield and reduce need for pesticides and medicine. You might even engineer plants to produce certain medicines or complex chemicals. With these and other modifications, a group of techno-primitivists could live with medieval-level technology in their everyday lives, but perhaps get better agricultural results than many modern people do. And they don't need to be the best at it, just good enough, as a society using 2% of their population to grow food might not feel obliged to employ distasteful methods to lower that to 1%. Modern materials would also improve various farming tools and fences, reducing maintenance and replacement costs. This is already quite common, just so common that we don't really notice it as anachronistic, and many times old techniques pop up in agriculture as viable again with some modern tech refinement. Frequently, old family farms have old tech lying around that someone feels like restoring or tinkering with. One might argue modern beekeeping caught back on as fashionable in large part to modern materials making the suits a lot lighter and cooler to wear than old ones, while also being better at protecting you from irritated bees. I think that's how my wife got into it. Both her grandfathers kept bees, but those better suits of nowadays make it cheaper and easier to get into it, and to get kid-sized suits that our kids, nieces, nephews, and friends' kids can try on and go see the bees safely up close. A lot of hobbies get easier to do the old-fashioned way with modern revisions. Woodworking is a great example. I still use old-style hand tools for a lot of it, like a simple chisel, but they're made from modern materials and I or the hobbyists or professionals use whatever power tools we feel like. And a big one, we all have access to libraries full of knowledge and these days, instructional videos on everything. If you want to learn how to make a cabinet, or even steel and hammer out a sword, there's step-by-step videos on YouTube about it. And again, it's often implicit that there's a lot of this sort of behavior in the future we discuss on this show. 10 years back I made the original megastructure summary video, or episode 0, to encourage sci-fi writers to not get so focused on classic sci-fi planets as settings and to look at big space habitats as more interesting, varied, and realistic scenarios for future human living locations. But even here, there's an assumption folks are often building anachronistic environments and cultures on them. While many may enjoy the aesthetics of modern brick, steel, and glass, or the bright, clean white of utopian future urban cityscapes, not everyone will. Some may opt for the appearance of traditional architecture, but still want to take advantage of the safety and durability that comes with modern materials. One can imagine an apparently simple log cabin in the woods, but one built from logs reinforced by carbon fiber and coated with diamond, or an entirely convincing synthetic wood stronger than steel. Classic stone architecture could likewise be simulated by synthetic stone or nanotech concrete, which makes structures stronger and more long-lasting. Or, as is often the case now, simply using a thin facade of stone over other materials. Nature preserves and national parks could maintain a rustic appearance by having their infrastructure look old-fashioned, such as rickety rope bridges actually strong enough to support the weight of freight trains. Or perhaps a culture just views obvious signs of technology as gauche and strives to make everything look as natural and humble as possible. Any old-fashioned architecture could benefit from subtle use of advanced materials. Indeed, you could argue that a lot of rural and suburban living in the modern world is invested in this same approach. Or a lot of urban gardening, green spaces, and rooftop gardens too. You do not technically benefit in any way by having a lawn and garden that suck up your time and money, or a workshop or sewing room or doing some home canning or food preserving, for instance. Show me anyone making a profit or getting big savings from any of those, and I'll show you some bad accounting, rationalizing, or better ways they could have made or saved money, with some exceptions. But even the most productive hobbies are break-even affairs at best. It really does not stop us from liking home crafts or craft shows, or extensive lawns and gardens. And yet, in post-scarcity or quasi-post-scarcity civilizations, even while money might still be in common usage, day-to-day survival isn't what folks are principally spending it on. So efficiency of production gets less important, even as advanced technology makes that production so much more efficient and automated. Instead, you see a shift to keeping yourself occupied, and that can be in pure fun-seeking in virtual environments and video games, or going for hobbies that feel productive and give you a sense of personal accomplishment, purpose, and usefulness. And there I see a lot of pathways for anachronistic technology to emerge and develop. Technology exists to help us live the lifestyle we want better or more easily, to open doors. So if an anachronistic technology, a primitive one reborn and updated, can open that door for someone to life and purpose they want, there's nothing outdated or vintage about it. Ultimately, there really is no appropriate time for technology. No technology can really be anachronistic, and a higher tech society is simply one with more technology, and that includes those that were used in the past and now may serve a new and changed purpose, even if in some cases that purpose might be helping us find our own purpose.
The marketplace is getting pretty technical these days, and as we saw today, that's not likely to change anytime soon. Even among techno-barbarians living in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, all that math and science is priceless. They can be a little intimidating to learn, but they don't have to be, and that's where Brilliant.org can help. Whether it's the basics of math and science, or the newest ideas in artificial intelligence, Brilliant has an amazing and ever-growing catalog of lessons that can help you learn and have fun while you're doing it. Build real knowledge in minutes a day, with fun lessons that you can do whenever you have the time. Learn through problem-solving and doing, with hands-on interactive content that's fun, immersive, effective, and intuitive. Brilliant.org's content goes from the basics all the way up to advanced materials on math, science, data, probability, computers, and AI. Start where you need to, and go as far as your dreams can take you. Our show turns 10 years old this week, and Brilliant is our longest-running sponsor, going back to the early days. And in all that time, I've never heard one negative review of them, but I have heard a lot of positive ones. They've been a great partner to the show, and you can trust them to be a great partner on your journey for knowledge. But you can find out risk-free. You can try out everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days. Just visit brilliant.org/IsaacArthur or click on the link in the description. You also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. As mentioned, SFIA turns 10 years old on September 17th, and we'll save the anniversary for this week's Sci-Fi Sunday on September 19th, where we'll look at the concept of transcendence, moving beyond the physical or to a different layer of reality, or even super compact societies, and its implications for the Fermi paradox and our own future. After that, we'll ask if privacy might be going extinct and what our options are for protecting it on September 26th, before closing out September on Sunday the 29th with a look at life as an asteroid miner. If you'd like to get alerts when those and other episodes come out, make sure to hit the like, subscribe, and notification buttons. You can also help support the show by becoming a member here on YouTube or Patreon, or check out other ways to help at isaacarthur.net. SFIA's episodes also come out early and ad-free on our streaming service Nebula, like this month's exclusive episode, Exploring the Multiverse, at go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur. As always, thanks for watching, and have a great week.